So welcome to the latest EUPJ webinar. It's becoming a regular Sunday afternoon hookup, I would say. Let's just wait for a couple more minutes. I see the attendees are still hooking on, and then we'll start. Okay, I think we don't have a full house. We're getting there. I think we can start. I'm Bill Etchickson, the director of the EUPJ's Brussels office, and I'm glad to host this event about the state of German Jewry and whether asking the question or trying to answer the question of whether there's a real, true Jewish Renaissance in Germany. We're lucky to have Walter Homolka, the rector of the Abraham Geiger College at the University of Potsdam and the chairman of the Union of Progressive Jews in Germany, and Sonia Guntner, I would say, who has also been involved in reestablishing progressive Judaism in her country of origin. And it was under her chairmanship that the Union of Progressive Judaism gained public charter status. In other words, gained legitimacy and state recognition for the progressive movement, and she's leading that charge throughout Europe. Walter's background is equally interesting. He founded the Abraham Geiger College in 1999, and it's the first German rabbinical seminary after the Shoah. He was ordained in 1997 and has held senior positions before that at Random House, Deutsche Bank, and as CEO of Greenpeace Germany. So we really do have the two biggest players, I would say, in our German Jewish, progressive German Jewish Renaissance. Now, as everyone knows, Germany has is celebrating 1,700 years of Jewish life this year. And it's a history that goes far beyond the Holocaust. There are now 120,000 German Jews and counting. Germany's Jewish population has been the one that has grown the most in the past 2 decades. And what we're going to look at today is whether this, why this Renaissance has taken place and whether it is fragile or really growing from strength to strength. We're also going to look at the state of anti-Semitism in Germany. And I think we'll have a conversation, informal conversation that'll last about an hour. For questions and answers, the best way to do that is to raise your hand and put it in the question and type it out in the question and answer box. And then I'll see them and ask them. We're also recording this seminar like we've done for previous seminars. And we are going to then write it up for the Times of Israel. So welcome everyone. Welcome Walter. Welcome Sonia. Let's plunge right into the substance. Walter, if you could give us a little history or start with what happened after the war for German Jewry, why it didn't completely die out after the Holocaust.
Well, I think it's fair to say that in the situation 1945, a lot of people were caught on German soil, either in displaced persons camps or otherwise on the way transiting to somewhere else, but then somehow were stranded in Germany. They started a family or, began university studies. And as a matter of fact, one can see that up until the 80s, people had a kind of a guilt feeling for having stayed there, or the next generation not having made Aliyah. And I think the first positive impressions on living as a Jew in Germany you get in a book that represents a number of interviews with young Jews in 1983, who then said, it's not enough to have a negative position. We also have positive things to say about being in Germany. So you can see that the identity of Jews in Germany was a fragile thing until the 80s. And we are talking about a Jewish community of, in the end, in 1989, of only about 25,000 Jews. So that's it's a minimal number. And had it not been for the mass immigration of Jewish people from the former FSU after 1990, I'm sure that the Jewish community would have had died down. And certainly in that number of Jews, you cannot build a progressive Jewish community, simply because the argument would always be, in our place, we have to live a Jewish life that is for everybody. And that was what I heard in my youth days. And if it is for everybody, then it is Orthodox, but we don't mind if you are non-observant Orthodox. So it was absolutely no problem to go to the ice cream parlor on Friday evening, but the service nobody attended in the Munich congregation was an Orthodox one. And I also remember when I was building a Friday evening chavurah in Munich, in the youth center. Munich was a fairly Orthodox congregation and still is up to this day. We had a small circle of people, and the Friday night service isn't really a particularly disruptive denominational thing. It's simply the Friday night service, but we didn't. Women and men sat together in one circle. And it took about a couple of weeks. The youth center was far enough away for the Orthodox rabbi to walk to it, but he got the news. And I well remember that he then sort of forbade it after a couple of weeks. And I asked him, why would you do this? Because none of the people that go there would ever go to your synagogue. So, there's absolutely no competition. And his answer was, you cannot rescue everyone for Judaism. So either it's the full lot or we'll forget about it. And I think that was the beginning for my intention to work towards a more pluralistic Jewish attitude. And I hope you can see what before 1989 was the norm: orthodoxy, but virtual, with very little commitment to it. And also one has to say that, there was this saying, you enter the plane in Israel as a bookseller from Bnei Brak, and you exit the plane as the chief rabbi of some German state. There wasn't an exactly intellectual crowd serving the German Jewish community. So also the Orthodox had a real problem in getting the right people. All of this changed in 1990.
Yeah, Sonia, why don't you pick it up? We've discussed the collapse of the Berlin Wall, immigration from the former Soviet Union, yet that revitalized the community. How? But it also brought new challenges because they didn't have much of a tie with Germany, I think.
Correct. There was huge numeric growth. And people initially really joined mostly the Orthodox communities, the traditional communities, let's say, because that is how the system was operated, with support and all sorts of systems to really facilitate their integration. And I think it is very important to be aware how difficult, how challenging it really was for people from the former Soviet Union, countries who'd been communist, anti-religious for, let's say, 70 years, where practicing Jewish religion was absolutely impossible, at least in public. And people came to Germany not only with the huge challenge of integrating into the Jewish world, the Jewish communities, but also the wider world, languages, jobs, raising children, raising families. That was a huge challenge for them. And I think Judaism wasn't on the forefront or sort of the main agenda for everybody, clearly, because it was a huge challenge overall. So fortunately, the communities actually did grow and did actually compensate for some of the demographic issues which Walter has already highlighted. However, I think it still remains to be seen what the demographic development will be going forward, as not everybody, of course, became a religious active Jew in the communities. And so I think that is a very diverse situation now.
Yeah, I see that we have a question already from Rabbi Andrew Goldstein, which is what percentage of Jews in Germany in 1950, so right after the war, were of German origin? And I guess that raises also the larger question of what was the German Jewish experience was largely progressive since the 19th century. And what did the switch to Orthodoxy mean, or how was it? You've explained, Walter, how it was imposed, but did it fit well with German Jews who were left after the war? So
I think Rabbi Goldstein points in the right direction. There were, in fact, after 1945, very few of the incumbent liberal German Jewish population was there. But we are talking about largely Eastern European people who had survived in the camps or survived the death marches, and these were more traditional Jews. So we had a new population in Western Germany that had a more traditional outlook. Okay, there was a couple of German families left, but we can certainly say that there was an exchange of Jewish population at that time. Then in the 50s, we had lots of influx from Poland, people who fled the Gomulka regime. Then there was the influx from Hungarians, and at the end in the 90s now from Russians. So this is not the pre-war Jewish population anymore. And therefore, I think we had, there was always an opportunity for change, and certainly in the 1990s, when all these, some 200,000 immigrants came, they were largely not religiously active, and also not sure to which of the denominations they would belong. So I think up until today, we have a situation where we have about 100,000 Jewish members of congregations, which also shows that a lot of the people who immigrated were lost because of Orthodox definition of who is a Jew. But about 100,000 are now in the congregations. Of those, I would say 10% are firmly Orthodox, and one can see a certain renaissance also in positive Orthodox life. That is a visible group, and certainly 10 to 15% are solidly progressive as signed up members. But in between, there is a huge group of people who say, I have not yet decided who I would say or assume are probably leaning towards some kind of traditional but non-orthodox definition of their way of life. However, in the German system of the Einheitsgemeinde, you do not have to make up your mind. You are, you're comfy being just swimming with the flow. In the bigger cities, you then have the options of various synagogues. In Berlin, you have a full choice. You can go one day to this synagogue or that synagogue, all under one umbrella, the Jewish community of Berlin. So not all progressive Jews are under the wing of the Union of Progressive Jews either, yeah? But there are synagogues who do not belong to the Union, but still are clearly non-Orthodox. And therefore there is a whole variety of shades, and it needs a kind of a guide to understand the German way of identifying as a Jew. There are various possibilities.
Sonia, thanks, Walter. Maybe you can pick up the story. How did, when Israelis, I mean, the latest immigration from Israel, from America, how important has that been to the modern German Jewish community?
Well, as a matter of fact, many of the progressive communities started with immigration, mostly from the United States, partly expatriates coming from the UK and other countries who were looking for a permanent way of leading a progressive Jewish life with their families in Germany. And I think we have to be aware that for almost 50 years, and that's a huge, in historical terms, that's a huge chunk of time, progressive Judaism had been de facto absent from its country of origin, which I think is it tells you how huge the challenge was to finally establish those communities. And I think the most recent immigration, Jewish immigration to Germany, has a lot to do with Berlin turning into one of the most interesting cities in the world after the reunification. There's a fantastic scene in Berlin as far as the arts are concerned, and I think it has become attractive as a place to live and work. And the same is true for some other places in Germany. And I think it is fair to say that we're seeing Judaism turn into more and more of an urban phenomenon in Germany as well.
Interesting. And we see the Cologne Cathedral behind you. Yes, you're sitting in Cologne. Could you tell us a little bit about how Progressive Judaism reestablished? You helped it reestablish in Cologne after the absence of 50 years?
For those of you who can see the cathedral behind me, this is where the marble slab is on display, which is actually the source that the program 1700 Years of Jewish Life in Germany refers to, an edict by the Roman Emperor allowing Jews, or actually making Jews a part of the Senate with all the responsibilities that entailed at the time. So this is the very place we're talking about. Progressive Jewish life in Cologne started in the 90s as a very small group. We literally met in people's living rooms and gradually and slowly moved on to trying to establish a fully fledged community. We were very, very fortunate in having Michael Lawton from the UK as one of our guiding figures, who not only sings beautifully, but also was able to really, in terms of religious life, conduct services and really bring the community up very, very quickly. And we found, that the bizarre situation in Cologne is that of all the Cologne synagogues, only one remained standing after the Second World War, as a ruin, of course. And that used to be the liberal synagogue. It was the largest pre-war synagogue in Cologne, a liberal synagogue, which was then, of course, returned to what had become an Orthodox community. And so with the problems that we had in terms of establishing a community, finding the finances, finding an infrastructure which would support the community. And I'm sure there are many people on the call who have experienced a similar pathway with their own community in continental Europe. We approached the Orthodox community saying, is there any way you could support us, help us? Can we cooperate? And as Walter has already indicated, by then, the system was fairly established as it was, and we were seen as intruders. People weren't quite sure what Progressive Judaism was all about, because, if something's absent for half a century, it's easy to not be so sure about it. And we embarked on a lengthy process of trying to regain the credentials for Progressive Judaism in Germany, both religiously and, of course, eventually in terms of participation in the infrastructure and financial support given by the government. Unfortunately, I have to say, and it still astonishes me to this day, we actually had to go through the courts to establish that, and that in itself was a long process. And it also, coincidentally, started in Cologne. We were literally told to take it up at the courts and to have the courts decide how the financial contributions to the Jewish community should be distributed among the various denominations. A very interesting topic in itself if you look at church-state law, because you'd think in a secular state, the government and the courts have no say in this question, but they actually do. And we're very grateful for the experience that we've made here, because it now helps the establishment of Progressive Judaism and the recognition of Progressive Judaism in many countries around the EUPJ.
Yeah, Sonia, and there is a question. Go ahead.
Sonia has pointed to the fact that Judaism is kind of an established faith in Germany. And so I think the task was to show that Progressive Judaism is a part of the Jewish spectrum. And here it was very helpful that we had early affiliation with the World Union for Progressive Judaism. And in 2002, as a matter of fact, the Federal Administrative Court ruled that the definition of whether you belong to the Jewish community with regard to the state funding of Germany, you need to belong to one of the denominations of Judaism as they are internationally represented. And that somehow shifted the definition authority away from the German Jewish community and the Central Council of Jews in Germany to a sort of more international view. And I think that was the groundbreaking shift, because that meant that from then on, it was clear that we are part of Judaism in the sense of the state law. However, that did not yet, as Sonia pointed out, decide of how much of the cake we would get. It would just mean that we can sit down at the table.
So, I mean, we do get a question already from Iris Harland of what is the situation now? Do Progressive Jews receive their full quota, so to speak? Sonia, maybe to you?
Well, I think Walter would be the best place to give you an accurate answer, but I do believe that we are struggling still mainly because, you know, let me raise the practical questions, and I know they were very much an issue in my time as UPJ chair, and some of them are certainly continuing. It is access to infrastructure, which is very often very difficult. The synagogues, the synagogue rebuildings, which have been supported, are mostly in the hands of the Central Council communities. In some cases, again, as in Cologne, progressive Jews do not have access to a Jewish cemetery, even though in the Cologne area there are 53 of them, most of which are closed, of course. But there is a lot that still remains to be done to secure a stable future for the progressive community. However, I really do wish to recognize the huge effort that many people at the Central Council, at the German government, have made over many years to try and address that question, and to try and learn that, for example, Judaism is not a hierarchical religion. You know, in many questions when you talk to government representatives, the assumption is that Judaism must be somehow like, well, again, Cologne Catholicism, you know, it's a pyramid and there's a person at the top and you're trying to speak to that person. But really, of course, with Judaism, as we all know, we are famously pluralistic in our opinions. So that also is a process, and I think we all have to recognize that that process takes time, and the more vocal we can be as progressive Jews, the easier it is going to be for people who are not so familiar with the internal structures of Judaism to understand what this is about and why actually, and I've been going on and on about this in my time as UPJ chair, why Germany has every reason to be proud of its particular contribution to Jewish history and to Judaism, because of course, as you've mentioned, Bill, at the beginning of the conversation, this is where progressive Judaism originated in response to the Enlightenment, to movements of social emancipation, the academic study of the Jewish tradition, and it has become a hugely successful stream of Judaism. And I think it's great that this 1700 years of Jewish life in Germany program really celebrates that. And it is the first time that I can remember that it really happens in such a huge program all over the country. And I'm very optimistic about the outcome of this.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. Did you get access to the main synagogue, the liberal synagogue before the wars, or that's still Orthodox facility?
It's still Orthodox, yes. I get access, but it is Orthodox.
It is up on the second floor, I'm sure.
Yes, indeed. Absolutely correct.
Yeah, I mean, but
I think it's fair to say that we weren't successful in being the inheritors of the progressive heritage, because that had already been taken up by the Jewish communities after the war that existed there. And to some extent, that is understandable. But it makes it also clear how hard it was to then, with the recognition as a part of the Jewish community, you still have to build a new infrastructure. And it's quite impressive to say that with the help of the various German authorities in the states and also on federal level, we could establish a sizable infrastructure, and also with the help from abroad. I mean, here on the talk is Elizabeth Frank. I know that she helps the Hamburg community, and I thank her very much for that. And so every community like Hamelin or others had an American help group that helped them establish. As a matter of fact, we have now synagogue buildings in many of the union congregations. Bielefeld, Hanover, Hamelin has just celebrated 10 years of the erection of their synagogue. So synagogue buildings, that new synagogue buildings have sprung up all over. And for example, the Abraham Geiger College, as we speak, is in the process of moving into its own new premises, a 12 million renovated 18th century mansion in Potsdam, which has been given to us by the government for safekeeping. So I would say it took 25 years to build anew a visible structure which is competitive to other synagogues, so that we can now proudly say, why not come to us? We are not meeting in a garage, but we are actually a real alternative to existing congregations. And then one has to say that in some places, for example, in Frankfurt, there is a space for the liberal congregation within the with the now Orthodox complex. Also, the main synagogue used to be progressive. And in Berlin, there are two Jewish communities using the premises of the Jewish community of Berlin. One is a union member and the other one isn't. But so I would say our outreach, goes beyond the borders of the conscribed members. There is a sizable amount of progressive Jews, and some even with a tradition pre-1989. So I am also sharing Sonia's perception that in the long run, we are well prepared to share in this Jewish Renaissance, because also I can see a lot of the young Jews are faced with challenges like choosing their marital partner, or having a personal crisis which simply isn't addressed by the Orthodox. I'm also running the student support scheme for Jewish students in Germany, for all, from secular to Orthodox. It's a scheme that supports Jewish students of excellence. And here I have a very good overview, because they come from all walks of life, Orthodox congregations or no congregational affiliation at all. I have a fair view of where people go. And number one is people stay where they are, where they have grown up. It's very difficult for ideological reasons to make somebody change their peer group. But on the other hand, if there are essential questions that come up in life, they may actually do so. But on the other hand, I've seen that it is important to claim the main ground and not be cozy in the periphery. Because if you are there in the main ground, if you are offering your programs in the general national youth rally, and if you are present as an alternative in the existing structures, you are far more likely to be found by people who are looking for something meaningful, but would never go so far as to go to that other synagogue outside of the outskirts of the, so I think the policy here is to number one, push the mainstream Judaism more into the middle, which I think we have achieved. If you look at the policies in the 80s, I would say the Central Council of Jews in Germany now has fully, has become more mainstream in that sense, that they are more welcoming to other views, and they would nowadays in official situations always claim that they are representing all streams of Judaism, certainly something that they wouldn't have said 20 years ago. But it's also important that we stay in the main ground, and therefore the German, the policy of the Union has always been to keep a foot in the door of mainstream Judaism, but also thanks to Sonia's great achievement of making us a publicly chartered institution, we can always say, yeah, but we are not the only, they are not the only representation of Judaism. We can always hold up our hand and say, what about us? And very often this works, and the government then says, well, we don't want this to come up as a political issue. how much would you need in order to not bring it up? That has actually helped us in achieving a wider financial opportunity for us. In the chat, there is actually a question of what is the role of the Israelis there. And I can just say a sentence to that. One would think that those Israelis who have left Israel and started to live here, that they would be a potential recruiting ground for progressive Judaism. But I'm sorry to say that that hasn't happened. And even with rabbis such as Tovia Ben-Chorin, who is a Sabre, and we always thought that he would be able to reach out. But I think the truth of the matter is that those people were fed up with religion in Israel, and they fled from a life that defined large parts of their private life in Orthodox religious terms. And so it is really very difficult to interest them in any way to Jewish life in general, and also to progressive Jewish life. So that has never been a major impact. And we haven't found the recipe. I know that there are some initiatives in America that have done well, but I'm sorry to say that that is not a big recruiting ground for us.
Interesting. Okay, we're getting lots of questions, and I think request to broaden the subjects. A question from Israel is, obviously there's been a lot of Israeli immigration to Germany. Is that related? How important is that? And do these Israelis who are coming to Germany have any relationship with the progressive movement?
Sonia?
Yes, I think Walter has already referred to that in some way. My observation is exactly the same. The attraction of Germany for Israelis moving here is mostly not the progressive Jewish life. I think it is fair to say that. Their interest is in other aspects here. I think a lot to do with high tech, a lot to do with the arts. I think there is mostly a secular a group of Israelis who are interested in Germany.
And another question we have from Brussels is whether conversion plays an important role, whether there are a lot of non-Germans, non-Jewish Germans who want to become Jewish now. Is that an important phenomenon in Germany?
Look, conversion has always played some part, even in the times when the congregations were small. It has been a heated issue. In a very small defensive Jewish community, conversions are obviously a big issue, even when it is because of marriage. And I know fully well that people who seeking conversion had a very hard time. And here the emerging progressive communities were a solution, although obviously the conversion candidates had a question of whether they would join proper Judaism or some kind of a sect. I think we have been able, step by step, to normalize situation a little bit. Also, the demand has diminished widely after the second Intifada. The numbers of Germans who wanted to convert to Judaism were smaller than before. So that's a fact. But we have a constant number of people converting. And I think the great achievement was that under the wings of the Central Council of Jews in Germany, there are two rabbinical courts, one Orthodox and one non-Orthodox. And therefore, we can now process these conversions if we find them
Legitimate, I guess.
Sorry?
Legitimate.
Legitimate, yeah. That means that the conversions theoretically have to be accepted in all of the Jewish communities in Germany. Meaning that if you move from one city to the other, you need to be given membership in that new community, even if they have an Orthodox rabbi. That does not mean that you then enjoy privileges such as being called up to the Torah, but you are a member of the Jewish community. And should you need any life cycle events like marrying or so on, the community is obliged to get you a progressive rabbi to officiate at your life cycle event. So that's the theory. It doesn't always work that way, but in that sense, we achieved a much bigger integration between the Orthodox and the non-Orthodox Jews than in many other countries of Europe. And I think while this also means that you have to make compromises here or there, you also have that great advantage that you can always say, well, we play by the rules. Now the Orthodox also have to play by the rules, and that's a good way of keeping things together. I think it works very well and can be an example for several other countries that have the same legal situation, such as Hungary or Poland or Czech Republic. So there is I think there is an advantage in keeping the connection to the mainstream Jewish community in such a way that they cannot disregard you, but also at the same time are independent enough to develop the progressive identity. So it's a bit of a walking on eggs, as one says in German.
Well, I think we've done more than 40 minutes without talking about anti-Semitism, and that's I think an accomplishment, but we should get there. Walter, you mentioned the Second Intifada. What is the danger and the reaction in Germany? What is the danger of left-wing anti-Semitism, and now with the AfD, right-wing anti-Semitism? How do you see that, both of you?
Sonia, would you like to start?
Look, we talk a lot about anti-Semitism and racism and political extremism, as we've rightly identified, both from the far right and the far left. Those dangers are real, as we all know. We have seen some very, very troubling developments in the past few years alone. Having said that, and being fully aware of the seriousness of the incidents which have occurred in Germany and other countries in Europe and worldwide, the biggest challenges that we still face are ignorance and indifference. I think that is an important point to make. We still have just a wealth of learning to do and to offer and to promote. And I do believe that this program of 1700 years of Jewish life in Germany is a fantastic opportunity to not use anti-Semitism as the starting point, but to use positive context, positive content, and to celebrate that. It couldn't be clearer. I mean, Judaism in Germany is a lot older than Germany itself, right? I mean, that's the irony in 1700 years of Jewish life in Germany, because Germany isn't nearly 1700 years old. So we have to be clear that there is a huge opportunity in highlighting and in pointing out that the fact that this country has been religiously diverse and pluralistic for a huge chunk of time, 1700 years, should try and help us to address some of the key questions that so fuel anti-Semitic hatred and racist hatred. I mean, the Jews aren't the only religious minority under threat in this and other countries. We have to be very clear that this is a huge opportunity to sort of change the narrative in a positive way. Having said that, again, not to downplay the extreme danger. And I have to say, with the AfD bill, who you've mentioned, now being under surveillance, it is going to be very interesting to see what their popularity is going to be in upcoming elections. We have two in two states in Germany today. At the end of this webinar, we'll know what the first indications are. And I have to say, it is going to be very, very interesting. And I want to be very clear, it is for everyone to speak up against racism. We often, and anti-Semitism, we often, I mean, Walter will have the same experience. We often get asked about it. It is not only about the Jewish population of a country. It is about the cohesion of a country. It is about the protection of minorities and a positive view of minorities. And in Germany we have a saying: it always starts with the Jews, it never ends with the Jews. You know, it is a whole complex threat which our societies are under, and it is very, very important that this program, this year-long program, which is very international and very multifaceted, really gets used to put a completely different spin on the narrative that we've been battling with for so long.
Yeah, Sonia, I think that brings up the question of one of the major social changes in Germany over the last couple of years, the arrival of so many Muslim refugees from the Middle East. What has been the response of the Jewish community, and do we see the Jews welcoming these refugees or fearing them?
I think we had a twofold reaction. Number one, the reason why so many Muslim immigrants came were because the asylum laws of Germany were built after the experience of the Shoah. So you cannot really argue as a Jew that Germany should be a refuge for people in need, because that is the exact, you know, the Jewish experience was the reason why the laws are as they are. And in fact, a lot of Jewish communities have been very active in trying to reach out to these people and help. On the other hand, as the chairman of the Central Council of Jews in Germany said, a lot of these people come from countries who were, who condoned a negative view on Jews, and therefore they come with prejudices. And therefore there is also undeniably some fear within the Jewish community of what this shift in the German society will mean. I think my I try to deal with this simply by building exemplary projects that bring Jews and Muslims together. Number one, we were the foster organization for the Muslim Scholarship Foundation for Students of Excellence. Yeah? So our Jewish organization helped build up the Muslim organization. We, as the union, we started trips of young young Muslim refugees and young Jews to Auschwitz to share the experience. From this, we made a program called Begegnung and Encounter, which is ongoing in this. We built an organization called Dialogue Perspectives, where young people of all walks of life and all kinds of religious backgrounds meet and talk about their spiritual inclinations. So I think Muslims and Jews must be seen as being together, and in next month, I'll publish a book with one of the eminent Muslim scholars in Germany, Muhannad Khurshid, where we say that there is no way back from a pluralistic society into a homogeneous society. That, we are now as we are, and there is no majority and minority, but there are just various groups that have to learn, live together. And we try to show that Islam and Judaism actually have something to offer to the German society. And I'll be interested to see how controversial that book will be taken up. But I think it's good to be seen that Jews and Muslims tell the non-Muslim, non-Jewish German population that we are a firm part of this country, and that we are also sharing the values that are so often mistakenly summarized under the Christian Occident, because it's not so Christian. It is a shared space, and we need to develop this if we want to develop our democracy. And I think that is a view that certainly the Union of Progressive Jews stands for. And I'm hopeful that we will come to some kind of an agreement with the Muslim community, as locally we have so often done, and that even the ghost of ignorance that the AfD represents, as we're all looking at the new figures, but as I see it from Brandenburg, where the AfD is very strong, they are losing some ground, and let's hope that that stays. But I still, even when they were 20%, there were 80% of Germans who didn't vote for the right-wing populists, and that is a very firm basis. And the Jewish community certainly enjoys the attitude of the government that it is raison d'être of Germany to stand with Judaism and to stand with the State of Israel. And that is a very firm statement within the European Union, where we know that some countries have a much vaguer position.
Thanks, Walter. I think we have about 10 minutes left. I will get to all the questions. We're getting a lot of questions. Let's look forward for German Jewry to conclude. I see one of the dangers is that it's an aging community. I read, Walter, that it was half the members are over 60 years old, and that 5 members die for every newborn. Is it, do we see inevitable decline of German Jewry?
The growth after 1990 was somehow not sustainable. Number one, a lot of elderly people came. Then the government made the big mistake to really try and bring them into, to sort of distribute them evenly among the territory, which resulted in the foundation of a lot of congregations that didn't exist before. And inevitably, the demographics show that the younger generation moves to the bigger cities, particularly because they study at a university and then build their home in bigger communities. So I think in the next couple of years, we'll see the amount of Jewish communities diminish from now 120 to perhaps 50. But that doesn't mean necessarily that that will be a poorer Jewish life. I think it is normal that we sort of build bigger, clusters in the bigger cities. And while the overall number of Jews will also diminish, we also have a huge amount of potential members in those Jews that were rejected in the 90s because of matrilineal descent. We have the ability to win over, especially in the progressive congregations, people who were not taken in by the Orthodox congregations. So in the end, on a smaller scale, we will still see a pretty active Jewish life, however, with a smaller number of congregations.
That does, there is one question, Walter. Originally, I guess the immigrants from Soviet Union would not have been accepted if their father was Jewish, right? And that is now changing. That is the reservoir that you see that we can attract.
Well, we see a lot of young people who then come and try to seek a way to the Jewish heritage of their ancestors, be they matrilineal or patrilineal. And therefore, I think that topic just isn't over. It will stay an interesting topic. And while the Union of Progressive Jews in Germany does adhere to the definition of matrilineal descent, also because we want to want the common platform with the mainstream Jewish community, we nevertheless, in the 35 principles of the Union, have explicitly invited people to claim their heritage if they share this heritage, and we would then permit them with ease to proclaim their Jewish identity in a way that involves a rabbinical court, but is certainly not difficult.
Okay, thank you. Walter, there's another question for you. Are all the progressive rabbis now trained in Germany, or do they come from elsewhere as well?
Well, after World War II, we have to say that there were quite some significant liberal rabbis present in Germany as well. So there was Nathan Peter Levison trained at HUC, with Henry Brandt trained at Leo Baeck College, and also nowadays there are people who are from the Aleph program. So while we have the Abraham Geiger College for the progressives and the Zacharias Frankel College for conservative Masorti Judaism, there is a variety of training centers present in the General Rabbinical Conference. Although I would say some 2/3 of the rabbinate nowadays comes from the Abraham Geiger College. And you have to remember they are also serving United Synagogues because the number of people that we train is certainly outnumbering the pulpits available in the EUPJ congregations. So my role as a head of a rabbinical training institution is to train a rabbi who is possible to operate under traditional circumstances just as well as under progressive ones. So that I think that's quite healthy, because these people also need to be in constant touch with Orthodox colleagues. They need to be able to discuss with them. They need to stand up in their abilities. We try to train a sustainable form of progressive rabbi that can operate and survive in different environments.
Sonia, for you, do you have any final thoughts on whether, whether German Jewry, is it something that will continue to grow and prosper, or do you see the dangers outweighing the opportunities? And I think from David Maxa in Prague, we have a specific emphasis on whether progressive Judaism, what are the main challenges in Germany for the years to come?
I have to say I'm hopelessly optimistic always, and I have to say, after 1700 years and the disasters that we've also seen throughout 1700 years, not just in the 20th century, I have a strong, fervent belief that Judaism in Germany will always be here, will always be a part of everyday reality. I have to say, I even think, with all respect to all other denominations, that long term, I see the return to the situation that we had pre-war, where Progressive Judaism was by far the largest denomination in Germany. And I believe that's where we're eventually going to head back to. I totally agree with Walter that quantitative growth, as in so many other areas in our lives, should no longer be the only definition of success. That is very, very important. And obviously, in my role, both as at the EUPJ and at the World Union for Progressive Judaism, I am very aware that generally the way we refer to communities, the way we understand communal structures, is going to come under very positive pressure from the younger generations who affiliate differently, who have different expectations of structures like communities. While the transition to that new model is probably going to be difficult for us and a huge learning curve, particularly for the progressive institutions around the world, I do believe that we have a huge potential for growth in terms of structural growth and development of progressive Judaism. And I see absolutely no reason why that shouldn't be the case in Germany. And with the excellent structure in place here and a rabbinic seminary, I think Germany may have many very, very valuable contributions to make to that process now and for the years to come.
Thanks, Sonia. Walter, do you have any final thoughts?
Well, one last thought, which I think is soothing, certainly for the European Union, due to the fact that we gained this support from the German government. I think we have now one of the most stable institutions. And therefore, while I saw both in the financial catastrophe of 2008 and also now during Corona, we saw so many threats to our Jewish institutions worldwide, we had no problem. The rabbinical seminary could work just as normal as everybody else, because all of our professors are state civil servants. And therefore, I think we can also offer a huge service to other countries to provide training and to provide also structural help and assistance and partnership, which we already do, especially for our neighboring countries, Poland, Czech Republic. I mean, Rabbi Maxa is on the call. We see ourselves certainly as a European institution, and therefore I think, will play an eminent role in the future of progressive Judaism in Europe. And we are happy to share our possibilities with everybody who wants to be with us. And I think that is the reason of why we have the EUPJ
Yes, I will thank you
together.
personally, Walter, because you're training our next rabbi in Brussels, Brian Doyle. So it is a personal thanks. I think we've come to the end of the hour. We've covered most of the issues. I appreciate. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Before I sign off, I'd like to say that next week, at pretty much the same time, we have a webinar on Jews and refugees. We're partnering with HIAS, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, and we have a 2-hour teach-a-thon in a sense. So if any members of your community are particularly interested in learning how to engage with refugees, please contact us. And then in next month, we'll be continuing our webinars with a webinar on the lost languages of European Jewry, Ladino, Yiddish. We have an esteemed professor from the United States who will be presenting. If you have other ideas for subjects that you'd like us to deal with, please contact us. we appreciate. And if you have other suggestions for improving or engaging in Brussels and through the European Union of Progressive Judaism, please do also contact us. Finally, so thank you for spending part of your Sunday with us, and we'll see you soon. Best of wishes. Thanks, Sonia. Thanks, Walter. Appreciate.
Bye.
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 Bye.